The Call of Duty, a War Story, Chapter 1. The Call of Duty. The cold December wind cut like blades through the Nebraska plains when James Jimmy Harrison received the letter that would change his life forever. It was 1943, and at 22 years old, a young farmer knew this day would come. His trembling hands opened the official envelope while his mother, Eleanor, watched from the kitchen window with tears in her eyes. "Dear Mr. Harrison," the letter began, "you have been selected to serve your country in the armed forces of the United States of America." Jimmy carefully folded the letter and placed it in the pocket of his plaid shirt. He had grown up hearing stories from his grandfather about the Great War, but never imagined he himself would be called to defend freedom in distant lands. That night during dinner, the Harrison family remained silent. Jimmy's father, Robert, a man of few words shaped by the hard land of the Midwest, finally spoke. "Son, I know you'll do what's right. You always have." 3 weeks later, Jimmy was on the train to the training camp at Fort Benning, Georgia. His backpack contained only the essentials, some changes of clothes, a family photo, and his grandmother's Bible. As he watched the landscape pass by the window, he wondered if he would see those golden plains again. Chapter 2. Forged in fire, military training transformed the young farmer into a soldier. 6 months of rigorous discipline, grueling physical exercises, and weapons training shaped not only his body, but also his mind. Jimmy discovered he possessed a natural ability for leadership and courage he didn't know he had. His instructor, Sergeant Mills, a World War I veteran with scars that told silent stories, recognized Jimmy's potential. "Harrison," he said one morning after a particularly difficult exercise, "you have what it takes to be a paratrooper. Ever thought about joining the Screaming Eagles?" The 101st Airborne Division, known as the Screaming Eagles, was one of the American Army's elite units. The idea of jumping from planes into enemy territory was both terrifying and exciting for Jimmy. "Sergeant," Jimmy replied, "if that's where my country needs me, that's where I'll be." Paratrooper training was even more brutal. Jimmy learned to jump, land, fight, and survive behind enemy lines. He formed unbreakable bonds with his unit companions. Tony Ritchie, an Italian-American from Boston with a sharp sense of humor. Samuel Sam Johnson, a history teacher from Chicago who quoted Shakespeare even amid chaos. And Miguel Santos, a Mexican-American from Texas whose language skills would prove invaluable. In June 1944, Jimmy and Ma down by the wire. They knew something big was approaching. The air was charged with tension and expectation. Veterans spoke in whispers about an operation that would change the course of the war. Chapter 3. The Longest Night Gentleman, announced Colonel Sink on the morning of June 5, 1944. "Tomorrow you will make history." Operation Overlord D-Day was finally coming. Jimmy and his Easy Company companions spent hours studying maps of France, memorizing escape routes and identification codes. Each man knew that many of them wouldn't return home. That night, Jimmy wrote a letter to his family. His words were carefully chosen, trying to convey love without revealing fear. "Dear Mom and Dad, I can't say where I am or what we're about to do, but know that I think of you every day. The farm, the golden cornfields, the smell of Mom's apple pie. These memories give me strength. Whatever happens, never forget that I love you more than words can express. Your son, Jimmy." At 11:30 p.m. on June 5th, Jimmy and his unit boarded the C-47 aircraft. The roar of engines mixed with the men's silent prayers. Some read letters from home for the last time. Others obsessively checked their equipment. "20 minutes to drop zone," shouted the pilot over the engine noise. Jimmy looked at his companions. In each face, he saw the same mixture of determination and terror he felt in his own heart. Tony made nervous jokes. Sam muttered verses from Henry V. And Miguel reviewed his French vocabulary. 10 minutes. German anti-aircraft fire began exploding around the plains. Red tracers cut through the darkness like deadly fireworks. Jimmy's plane swayed violently, and he could hear the metallic sound of shrapnel hitting the hull. "Get ready. Static line connected. Equipment check." Jimmy checked the parachute of the man in front of him, and felt Tony's hands checking his. It was a ritual they had practiced hundreds of times, but never under real fire. Door open, red light. The cold, damp Normandy wind invaded the aircraft cabin. Below, Jimmy could see the shadows of French fields and occasionally the flash of an explosion. Green light! Go, go, go! Jimmy jumped into the darkness, his prayer swallowed by the wind. As his parachute opened, he could see other paratroopers scattered through the night like dandelion seeds carried by the breeze. Some weren't as lucky. Their parachutes refused to open, and they fell like silent stones into French soil. Chapter 4. No Man's Land. Jimmy landed hard in a swamp on the outskirts of Sainte-Mère-Église. The cold water rose to his knees, and he struggled to free himself from the parachute cords before the weight pulled him down. His first sensation was relief at being alive, followed immediately by the realization that he was completely alone in enemy territory. Training took control. Jimmy checked his equipment: Montmorency rifle, ammunition, grenades, medical kit, compass, and map. Everything was in order. He needed to find his companions and locate the objective, a strategic bridge that should be destroyed to prevent German reinforcements. Moving silently through the flooded fields, Jimmy used the cricket sound they had practiced to identify other American paratroopers. Click, clack, click, clack. After 20 minutes of tense searching, he heard the response. Clack, click. It was Sam Johnson, emerging from a grove of trees with his uniform torn and an expression of obvious relief. Jimmy, thank God. Have you seen anyone else? No, you're the first. Where are we? Sam consulted his compass and map. I think we're about 2 kilometers south of the rendezvous point. What about you? Did you see the bridge? Before Jimmy could answer, the sound of German boots echoed on the nearby path. Both crouched instantly, controlling their breathing. A patrol of 4 German soldiers passed only 10 meters away, their low voices carrying in the night breeze. Französische Partisanen, Amerikanische Fallschirmjäger. Jimmy didn't speak German, but the word Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers, was clear enough. After the Germans passed, Jimmy and Sam continued their search for companions. Dawn was approaching when they finally found Tony and Miguel hiding in an abandoned barn. Tony had twisted his ankle in the landing, but insisted he could continue. We have to find that bridge, said Jimmy, naturally assuming command. Without it, German tanks can reach the beaches in a few hours. Chapter 5. The price of freedom with the sun rising over Normandy. The small group of American paratroopers moved cautiously through the French landscape. Every house, every fence, every shadow could hide enemies. Jimmy led, using the tracking skills he had learned hunting on the Nebraska plains. They found the bridge at noon, an ancient stone structure crossing a narrow stream but strategically vital. The problem was that it was well defended. Jimmy counted at least 12 German soldiers, plus a machine gun nest positioned to cover the approaches. We can't take this alone, muttered Sam, observing through his binoculars. We have to try, Jimmy replied. Every minute we wait, more Germans reach the beaches. They spent the afternoon planning. Miguel would use his French to try to make contact with the local resistance. Tony, despite his injured ankle, would position himself with the sniper rifle to cover the retreat. Sam and Jimmy would make the frontal assault. At 6 p.m., a young Frenchman named Pierre found them in the barn. His eyes shone with the flame of resistance, and he brought valuable information. The Germans changed guard at 8 p.m., and there was a drainage tunnel that led almost to the bridge. Mes Americans, said Pierre in broken English, nous vous aiderons pour la France. The attack began at exactly 8:05 p.m. Jimmy and Sam emerged from the drainage tunnel like ghosts of the night. The first German guard fell silently to Jimmy's knife before he could shout. The second was taken down by Sam's sure fist, but the third managed to fire a warning shot before Jimmy silenced him permanently. Hell broke loose. The German machine gun opened fire, its tracers cutting through the darkness like fire serpents. Jimmy rolled behind a stone wall while bullets ricocheted around him, sending shrapnel flying. Sam, are you okay? Jimmy shouted over the gunfire. I'm alive, but they have us in their sights. That's when Tony proved why he was considered the unit's best marksman. 3 precise shots from across the river permanently silenced the German machine gun, but victory came at a price. Jimmy saw Tony stagger and fall, a dark stain spreading across his uniform. "Tony?" Jimmy got up to run toward his friend, but Sam pulled him back. "He's gone, Jimmy. We have to finish this." With tears in his eyes, Jimmy planted the explosive charges on the bridge pillars. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from anger and sadness. Tony had paid the ultimate price for freedom. The explosion lit up the French night like a small sun. The ancient bridge collapsed into the river with a roar that echoed through the hills. The German reinforcement route was cut. Chapter 6. Brothers in arms. In the days following D-Day, Jimmy and his surviving companions joined other scattered units of the 101st Airborne Division. The Normandy landscape had become a labyrinth of war. Bomb craters, destroyed vehicles, and the indelible marks of conflict were everywhere. Jimmy had been promoted to sergeant after the bridge destruction, an honor he accepted with regret. Every promotion in war meant that good men had died. Tony wasn't the only one. In the first 3 days after D-Day, Jimmy lost 8 companions from his original unit. "You can't carry the guilt for their deaths," said Sam one night while they shared a can of cold beans in an improvised trench. Tony knew the risks. "We all know. He had a girlfriend back home," Jimmy murmured, looking at the yellowed photo he had found in Tony's pocket. "He was going to propose when he got back, and thanks to what he did, maybe other soldiers can return to their girlfriends," Sam replied gently. "That's the cruel mathematics of war, Jimmy. We save lives by losing lives." The battle for Normandy intensified. Jimmy and his rebuilt unit participated in the taking of Carentan, a strategic town the Germans defended fiercely. It was there that Jimmy saved the life of a wounded young German soldier, something that haunted him for years. The German soldier, no older than Jimmy, had been abandoned by his retreating unit. Jimmy found him in a basement, bleeding from a chest wound. For a moment, the two young men looked at each other, enemies by circumstance, but frightened youths by nature. "Hilf! Hilf!" the German murmured. "Help!" Jimmy could have continued on. No one would blame him for leaving an enemy to die, but something in the young German's voice, perhaps an echo of his own humanity, made Jimmy stop. He used his medical kit to stop the bleeding and left the German with water and some rations. "Krieg ist Hölle," said the German with a weak smile. "War is hell." "Yeah," Jimmy replied, "hell indeed." Chapter 7. The cruelest winter. December 1944 brought the most brutal winter Jimmy had ever experienced. The 101st Airborne Division was sent to defend the town of Bastogne, Belgium, during what would be known as the Battle of the Bulge, the last major German counterattack on the Western Front. The town was surrounded, supplies were scarce, ammunition was running out, and the cold was so intense that men woke up with their boots frozen to their feet. Jimmy, now a veteran sergeant, commanded what remained of his company. 17 men from a unit that had started with 45. Sergeant Harrison said, "Young soldier Peters, fresh from basic training. Do you think we'll make it out of here?" Jimmy looked at the young, hopeful face of the soldier. Peters reminded him of himself just a year ago, full of idealism and not yet marked by the realities of war. "We'll get out, soldier. We always do." But inside, Jimmy wasn't so sure. The Germans had launched their offensive with desperate ferocity. Panzer tanks roared through the snow-covered forests, and the sky was always gray. Too bad for Allied air support. On December 22nd, a German officer arrived under a flag of truce to deliver an ultimatum: unconditional surrender or total annihilation. General McAuliffe's response became legend. "Nuts!" Jimmy and his men laughed at the response, even knowing it meant more days of desperate fighting. They had learned to find humor in the darkest situations. It was a way to preserve sanity. During Christmas Eve, Jimmy organized a small celebration for his men. They shared their last special rations, and Miguel played Silent Night on a harmonica he had carried since training. For a few precious moments, the war seemed distant. "You know, Sarge," said Sam, "if someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be spending Christmas in a frozen trench in Belgium, I'd think they were crazy." "And now?" Jimmy asked. "Now I think we're all crazy," Sam replied with a smile. "But at least we're crazy together." The final battle for Bastogne came on the morning of December 26. The Germans launched everything they had in one last desperate attack. Jimmy and his men held their position in a bombed church. using the destroyed wooden pews as barricades. It was during this battle that Jimmy committed the act of heroism that would define him for the rest of his life. When a German grenade fell among his men, Jimmy didn't hesitate. He threw himself on the grenade, using his own body to protect his companions from the explosion. By some miracle, perhaps the grenade was defective. Perhaps it was just luck. Jimmy survived. But the impact left him unconscious, and he woke up 3 days later in a field hospital, with Sam holding his hand. "You were the biggest brave idiot I've ever met," said Sam with tears in his eyes. "I thought we'd lost you too." "My man?" was Jimmy's first question. "All alive, thanks to you. Patton arrived with tanks and broke the siege. Bastogne is safe." Chapter 8. The Last Jump. The war in Europe was coming to an end in the spring of 1945. Jimmy, now a first sergeant decorated with the Silver Star, was with the 101st as they advanced into Germany. German cities were surrendering one after another, and there was a palpable feeling that victory was near. It was during this period that Jimmy made his most disturbing discovery of the war. His unit was among the first to arrive at a newly liberated concentration camp. Nothing in military training could have prepared the American soldiers for the horror they found. Jimmy vomited upon seeing the piles of skeletal bodies and survivors who looked more like ghosts than human beings. Veteran soldiers who had seen the horrors of battle wept openly. The magnitude of human cruelty was simply incomprehensible. "My God," Sam murmured. "What did they do to these people?" Jimmy couldn't answer. He simply walked among the survivors, offering water and food from his own rations. A small child, no more than 10 years old, clung to Jimmy's leg with skeletal fingers and said something in Yiddish he couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear. "Thank you for saving us." That night, Jimmy wrote in his diary, "Today I saw why we fight. It's not for territory or politics or glory. It's for this, so that children aren't turned into ghosts, so that families aren't destroyed by hatred, so that basic humanity is preserved. If I die tomorrow, at least I know my life had purpose." On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. Jimmy was in a small Austrian town when he received the news. There were no great celebrations, just a contemplative silence from men who had seen too much and lost too much. But Jimmy's war wasn't over yet. The 101st was assigned to prepare for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. The thought of another bloody campaign weighed on all the men. However, on August 6th, a new weapon changed everything. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima brought a form of warfare Jimmy could barely comprehend. 3 days later, Nagasaki was destroyed, and on August 15th, Japan surrendered. World War II was over. Chapter 9. The Hero's Return. He carried in his backpack several unsent letters, photographs of dead companions, and both physical and emotional scars that would last a lifetime. The journey home was simultaneously joyful and melancholic. The men told stories, played cards, and talked about their future plans. But there were moments of silence when each dealt with their own memories and losses. "What are you going to do when you get home, Jimmy?" Miguel asked during one of the last nights at sea. Jimmy looked at the stars reflected in the dark Atlantic water. "I'm going to hug my mother, help my father on the farm, and try to forget some things I saw." "Do you think we'll be able to?" Sam asked. "Forget, I mean." "No," Jimmy replied honestly. "But maybe we can learn to live with the memories." When the ship arrived at New York Harbor on September 23rd, Jimmy saw the Statue of Liberty through morning mist. The Great Green Lady seemed more significant now. He had fought to protect what she represented, and thousands of good men had died for these ideals. Jimmy's train to Nebraska departed from Grand Central Station the next day. He said goodbye to Sam, Miguel, and other companions who had become closer than brothers. Each farewell carried the pain of knowing they would probably never see each other again. The American landscape passed by the train window. Cities rebuilding, green fields, people living normal lives. Jimmy watched a family having a picnic in a field, children playing, a young couple walking hand in hand. This was what he had fought for, to preserve these simple and precious scenes of American life. Chapter 10. Scars and Healing. The train station in Omaha was crowded with families waiting for their heroes. Jimmy got off the train with his military backpack and looked around for familiar faces. Then he saw them: his mother Eleanor, his father Robert, and his younger sister Margaret, who had grown considerably during the 2 years he was away. Eleanor shouted, running toward her son with tears streaming down her face. The embrace lasted forever and wasn't long enough. Jimmy felt safe for the first time in years, wrapped in his family's unconditional love. Robert, still a man of few words, simply put his hand on his son's shoulder and said, "Welcome home, soldier." The Harrison farm seemed smaller than Jimmy remembered, but no less special. The golden cornfields stretched to the horizon, and the familiar smell of earth and growth filled his lungs. It was exactly as he had dreamed during cold nights in European foxholes. But adjusting to civilian life wasn't easy. Jimmy discovered he couldn't sleep without checking doors and windows multiple times. Loud noises made him instinctively seek cover. He woke from nightmares sweating and screaming, reliving battles and losses. During Thanksgiving dinner, Jimmy tried to explain his experiences to the family. He talked about the friends he had lost, the places he had seen, the things he had done. But words seemed inadequate to convey the reality of war. "You can't imagine," he finally said, "the difference between killing someone because you have to kill and killing someone because you want to kill. War teaches you to do the first, but praise you never learn the second." Eleanor held her son's hand. "You're home now, Jimmy. You're safe. I know, Mom, but part of me will never leave those battlefields." Jimmy began working on the farm again, finding therapy in physical work and connection with the land. Planting and harvesting were acts of creation and nurturing, the opposite of the destruction that had dominated his life for so long. During the winter of 1946, Jimmy received a letter that would change his perspective. It was from Marie Dubois, a French nurse who had cared for him after a battle near Caen. She wrote to say she had married an American doctor and emigrated to the United States, but wanted Jimmy to know that the sacrifices of American soldiers would never be forgotten in France. "Dear Jimmy," she wrote, "you and your companions gave us back our freedom. Every day I live as a free woman is a gift you gave us. Merci, mon ami, merci pour tout." The letter helped Jimmy find meaning in his pain. He began to realize that his experiences, however traumatic, were part of something greater: humanity's ongoing struggle against tyranny and for basic human dignity. Chapter 11. Building a new life. In the spring of 1947, Jimmy met Sarah Mitchell during a social dance at the local church. Sarah was a teacher at the local elementary school, an intelligent and compassionate young woman who had lost her fiancé in the Pacific War. They connected through their shared understanding of loss and the need to find hope again. Their first date was a simple picnic near the stream where Jimmy used to fish as a child. They talked about books, about dreams, about how the war had changed their perspectives on life. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living a borrowed life," Jimmy confessed while they watched the sunset. "So many good men died. Why did I survive?" Sarah gently took his hand. "Maybe you survived to do something important with this borrowed life. Maybe it's to help other veterans, or to start a family, or simply to show that it's possible to find peace after war." Jimmy and Sarah married in June 1948 in a simple ceremony at the community church. Sam came from Chicago to be the best man, and Miguel traveled from Texas to be present. It was a joyful reunion, but also melancholic, as they thought of Tony and the others who couldn't share the joy. During the wedding speech, Jimmy spoke about the meaning of love in a world that had seen so much hatred. "Sarah taught me that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice we make every day. It's choosing to build instead of destroy, to forgive instead of hold grudges, to hope instead of despair." The couple settled on a small farm adjacent to Jimmy's parents' property. They raised cattle and planted corn, building a life based on the simple and solid values of the American Midwest. In 1950, their first child was born, Robert James Harrison, named after his paternal grandfather. Jimmy discovered that being a father brought a new dimension to his healing. Holding his son in his arms, seeing the world through a child's innocent eyes, teaching first words and steps. All of this helped balance the dark memories of war with the promise of a better future. Chapter 12. The call of service in 1952. Jimmy was elected to his small town's municipal council. He had never actively sought political office, but his reputation as a respected war veteran and active community member led neighbors to encourage him to run. "I fought abroad to protect democracy," Jimmy said in his first speech after the election. "Now I want to serve at home to make that democracy stronger." As a council member, Jimmy worked to establish programs for veterans who were struggling to readjust to civilian life. He knew from personal experience that many soldiers returned home carrying invisible wounds that were as real as any physical injury. Jimmy organized support groups where veterans could talk about their experiences without judgment. He established professional training programs for ex-soldiers and worked with local banks to provide loans.